Hello and welcome everybody to today's session about the technical deep dive into the ABAP RESTful Programming Model. My name is Marcel Hermanns. I'm a team member of the ABAP platform and I'm driving forward the topic around the programming model. So the presentation here, or more the demo related content, is shown on the TechEd in Las Vegas, in Barcelona and also in Bangalore. And in order to improve our session and the content, we of course are looking forward to get your feedback via the session survey. This session about the technical deep dive is combined with a session of the big picture of the ABAP RESTful Programming Model. In the big picture, there are more insights on the conceptual things about in RAP, and the technical deep dive is 90% demo presentation of RAP. There are also hands-on sessions available on how to create list report applications, read-only applications, and how to create a transactional application with the ABAP Programming Model for SAP Fiori. So I already used two different terms in order to clarify how they are related to each other. I first want to start with the evolution of the ABAP Programming Model. If you are a customer or partner working on an ABAP platform on below 750 or equal to 750, there are a couple of best practices available and on how you can create applications, whether they are Fiori applications or other applications. By introducing 751, or more precisely SP1 of 751, we introduced the draft concepts and the BOPF-based approach on how to create business objects based on the core data services CDS and the BOPF framework. On top of that, we have the SCGW, the Gateway Service Builder, with the reference data source concept, where you can easily create your OData service for Fiori applications or for other reasons on top of this CDS universe, including the business objects created by BOPF. OData published true is a simple alternative which can be used in certain scenarios, since it's quite easy to use this annotation, but on the other hand there are of course also some limitations because we need some default logic on how to create an OData service based on a simple algorithm. This programming model based on CDS and BOPF for the business objects, and based on this gateway tooling, is the current best practice. And exactly this programming model is shown in the hands-on sessions which I just mentioned one slide before. There are also recordings available on the TechEd, from the TechEd 2017 and also 2016, where we introduced the draft concept, and why we needed reasoning behind this is of course the scalability in the cloud and also to have a modern web-based UI available. Documentation is of course also available on how to apply this business object with best practices and also information around this programming model. 2 years back we thought about, is this programming model which we have here, is this something which we would also proudly present to our customers and TechEd here on for our customers and partners here on TechEd again in the year 2020? And does it also fulfill all the requirements which we have? And the answer is that we need some kind of improvement, an evolutionary successor, which is then RAP, in order to tackle two different things. The first thing is we need a better integration, a better offering on how to create or integrate the existing application logic or even legacy code, how to integrate that into our Fiori applications. And the second point we need to tackle is the development efficiency. And in order to cover both, we introduced the evolutionary successor, which is the ABAP RESTful Programming Model, or RAP as an unofficial term for it. RAP is already available for subcloud platform ABAP environment. That means the ABAP PaaS offering, the platform as a service offering, which we have from the ABAP platform, and RAP is already available in the very first version with 1808. And of course, with RAP, we also want to provide solutions for our on-premise customers and partners, and we plan to deliver that later. RAP is based also on CDS. CDS is our one and a single data modeling language, which we also reuse here, and we introduce some native concepts into RAP, as we can see later on, in order to significantly improve the TCD, the development efficiency, and also to enable the integration of this existing application code. So RAP is the future direction, and this is what we are going to talk about today. And there is already productive documentation available, since it is available in the ABAP path. And here you find a lot of information, and good information, providing you an overview about RAP, introducing a getting started scenario where you can start immediately without reading tons of documentation. We can then go a lot more into detail about the business object and the business service concept. And there are development guides available on how to create read-only and transactional applications. Now, of course, there are also detailed documentation on common tasks and reference documentation available. So now the question is, of course, for our customers and for our partners, how can they prepare themselves if they are still developing on a 750 or lower release? How can I prepare myself for the future? And the answer is that we provide here a link with the do's and don'ts which you can apply and which you should apply. It's just an offering, a recommendation from our side, what you can do in order to prepare yourself and to have a safe investment for the future. And of course, many customers follow our best practice, our guidance to use the programming model for SAP Fiori, also on 751, 752, or now 753. The question is the investment here by creating such a CDS BOPF-based business object, is this a safe investment? And our answer is that this investment will be integrated by us, by an integration into RAP, which we plan for 2020. That means you should not hesitate to use the ABAP Programming Model for SAP Fiori, because the things which you create here by following our best practices, creating the BOPF and CDS-based business object, is a good thing, and we will take care that this is integrated into RAP, which we of course also need to apply internally in S/4HANA. So, but now, what about the buzzwords in RAP? What about the big picture? We are always talking about the universe of the data modeling and behavior layer, which cover all the business objects which are available. Business object with a data model and with a behavior with the application code. And of course also queries, so like analytical queries or list report queries. And they all together are the universe of the complete data model and application coding layer. So in S/4HANA we also call that the virtual data model, where the application coding is currently not part of, but I from the technology point of view, would see this as a complete reuse layer, as a complete universe of all the data modeling, the database tables views, and also the available application logic. And now the question is, how can I project parts of this universe to a certain user interface, a role-specific user interface, or also to a cloud API, for example, A2X service. So therefore, in RAP, we offer a service definition. It's an artifact where you define the scope of this universe which should be exposed. It's protocol agnostic. It's a CDS-like artifact. In the service binding, we now have to bind the service towards a protocol and a protocol version. So for example, OData, v2 or v4, and also to a specific use case. Because a use case, so for example, like a UI backend service or an A2X service, the use case defines certain capabilities the OData service has to fulfill. If you want to create now a Fiori Elements application, we are highly interested in providing all the backend UI semantics which are stored in the backend because they are UI technology independent, but are required for the UI in order to get the semantics interpretable. On the other hand, an A2X service doesn't require such UI annotations, and an A2X service does also not require any value help which is required in a UI for the end user. But on the other hand, an A2X service, a cloud API, is an API, and APIs need a kind of versioning, release, and deprecation mechanism. So if we want to release now internally in S/4HANA services to the Open API Hub, we have to release them, and we have to take care for the lifecycle of this OData services. And therefore, it helps not only the OData services with regards to the performance, but also us to improve the tooling for the application developer in the backend, because in case we know that the service is an UI backend service, we can provide a UI preview of this OData service inside of the ABAP tooling, which is ABAP in Eclipse, the ABAP development toolkit. If we know it is an A2X service, we could also provide a documentation preview, a Swagger UI for the REST service, for the OData service. And now we will go a little bit more into detail in the system and see how this works end to end. So that means we will create, based on CDS views, a business object, and we will integrate this business object for an SAP Fiori application. But how can we start in a very simple way? I would suggest we start with an SAP GUI transaction and see how we can reuse the parts which are used in a SAP GUI transaction in our Fiori application, and yes, get the Fiori application then running end to end. So therefore, let's start with the SAP GUI transaction. So I'm now opening Eclipse, and we can see here the SAP GUI transaction. I press the execute button, and we can see that we can open here, for example, in the SAP GUI transaction, the travel ID 1, so the travel containing a lot of information about the agency, the customer, start date, end date, the booking fee, the price, total price of the travel, a description, and the status. And we can also see that there are bookings available. That means a list of bookings related to this travel. Not only related because they have an existence relationship. That means the bookings live inside of the travel. Once the travel is deleted, the bookings are also deleted. They cannot live alone. So now the question is, how can we create, based on parts of this SAP GUI transaction, how can we create such a Fiori application? How can we create a Fiori application, providing here now a list report with all the travels, where I can also filter, of course, on the travel ID 1. And then, once I get that, go also to the bookings and the details, the header information of this travel. I click on it, and we can go to the object page, where we can see all the related data. So we see a data point for the total price, we can see the travel information, we can see the booking information, and then also later on navigate further for the booking details. And of course we have here also HANA capabilities inside, where we can, for example, search for vacation. Of course, I mistyped it, so that we also find vacation on Hawaii. So we can see that we also have here the support of the fuzzy search, the error tolerant search of HANA. So, but now we are not yet there. We don't have the Fiori application. We just have the SAP GUI transaction. But within the SAP GUI transaction, we are using certain parts. And I assume here in this demo that we are in a scenario where we have not only the authorization object, the PFCG object, but also, for example, a log object available. So transactional enterprise applications always require a log object, enqueue object. But we also have the database tables, obviously, so where the data is persisted in the travel database table, and we also have partly decoupled application code available in function modules. So for example, the function group of the travel API contains function modules for the creation and the deletion and updating travel information, and of course also persisting it, the save function module, triggering then the update task. This might not always be the case if you have a SAP GUI transaction, because sometimes the coding is part of the PPO, PAI function or modules, not function modules, but modules. And of course, it's a lot of work to decouple it from PPO, PAI. Here, of course, it is really challenging for us and nearly impossible to decouple this coding in an automated way. We assume that this was already done following software engineering practices to decouple application coding from the actual UI technology or protocol in order to be able to reuse it. So here we have now PFCG object, the log object, the database tables, and also the available application coding available. Now the question is, how can I integrate that one into our programming model so that I can create in a very fast way Fiori applications, A2X service, and whatever comes in the future. And like I said at the beginning, of course, everything starts with CDS. So we go into our CDS views. In our demo package, we have a demo, of course, prepared, since I will not write every single letter here in the in this demo. So we have prepared stuff, and we will roughly go through that. So we have the data definitions. So, for example, a data definition for the CDS view of the travel business object. The travel business object is a CDS view selecting data from the travel persistence, and it is declared to be the root view. For me, a business object has always three things. The first thing is the data model. The data model of a business object is a tree of compositions, and the tree always starts with a single root view or root entity, which might be a view. And this root entity has, of course, composition children. So one or several or even zero, if there is just one node. And this root artifact here has one composition to the bookings. And if we navigate to the bookings, we can see that the booking node, business object node, selects the data from the booking table. And there is an association to the parent, to the travel demo CDS entity. So now I said there are three things of a business object. The first one is the data model. But before we come to the other two parts, which are the behavior modeling and the implementation, before we come to that, we will first create an OData service to see first results, to see the data which are persisted in this database tables we just selected here in the CDS views. Therefore, we go according to our big picture to the business services. So now we have a CDS, we have the CDS views, the business object without behavior in our universe, and we now create a projection based on this one. Therefore, in the service definition, we expose the travel and the booking CDS view and also other artifacts. The travel and booking CDS view can be aliased with the locally unique name, case sensitive, like travel and booking. Because if I create now an API or even an OData service for a Fiori application, we want to have nice names. We don't want to have the guiding principles from the CDS view, some VDM naming conventions. We don't want to expose this internal naming conventions to our OData service, obviously. Therefore, we can create locally unique names which are also completely taken over in the OData services. Besides the travel and booking CDS views, I also want to expose their value help CDS views. That means CDS views which are used in order to get the data for the value helps used in travel and booking. So in future we plan to expose them implicitly, or let's say explicitly, but by evaluating the value help annotations in travel and in booking. So then you don't need to repeat yourself, because these CDS views are already mentioned in the travel and booking CDS views as value help targets, as we can see later on. But here now, first step is we have to expose them explicitly and in a small way repeat ourselves here currently. So now we defined in a CDS syntax the projection, the things which we want to expose. And now we need to bind them towards a protocol. Therefore, I can do a right click here and say I want to create a new service binding. The new service binding, I provide a name like Travel Demo UI 7, and the description like UI backend service for travel functionality. And now I can define the binding type which should be applied. So it can be OData v2 or v4. v4 is not yet productive but internally available, so it's coming soon. But we have OData v2. We can select UI or A2X. Since we want to create a Fiori application, we select UI. The service definition was taken over when I did the right click. Now I can finalize this one. And we can see the editor of the service binding, where the binding type is available. I can publish the available OData service because I am now the backend developer, and within my development system I want to publish the OData service, and then we can see immediately the results. That means the OData URL, which I can open in a browser. But since I'm not a native XML speaker, I would like to have a nice Fiori Elements preview. So I can do a right click on the travel and open the Fiori Elements app preview and see the results of the OData service within this app. So currently, within the app, we can see that there are 4,150 entries, but there is no data available. This is because we don't have any setting which elements should be displayed. So I am, as the end user right now of this preview, I have to select them and I can see it. So obviously when I press F5 now, we can see that all the settings are gone. Of course, I am, as the end user, could now try to start creation of personalization or even variants and persist them. Of course not here in the preview app, but in a productive app. But of course we also want to offer a standard configuration of the UI. The standard configuration of the UI semantics, is UI technology independent. Because it's UI technology independent, it could also be applied to other UI technologies which might come in the future, which is pretty where we are pretty sure that there will come additional UI technologies in the future, in the far future, because on the UI side we have much faster innovation cycles than we have it on the back end. Therefore, we want to bring this UI semantics to the back end. The second thing is that we of course do not, what we also need to offer is some kind of layering. So we need to offer the possibilities that partners, customers, industries or whatever can override the default UI semantic provided by SAP if the applications are coming from SAP. Therefore, we need a layering approach. That means first thing, backend, second thing, layer approach, and the third thing is that of course the UI developer is the one who is responsible for the UI semantic. So currently we need to define it in the backend via some strange UI annotations in the so-called metadata extensions. In the future, this will be created based on a what you see is what you get editor within the web IDE, sub-web IDE, coming from the visual editor. So, but until we have the visual editor and the creation of this in a generated way, we need to do that manually as a backend developer. Therefore, we go now into the other backend, into the tooling, and we open the metadata extensions for the travel business object. So we can see that here now in the backend we have the UI annotations and we have the support of this layering. Even if we have to handwrite it now, which is not really nice because, for example, for the travel ID I really have to specify currently the position via syntax of this annotation, which obviously should be taken over by a nice tool. But I can activate that one, and we can see that the line item position 10 for the travel ID and the line item position 20 for the agency ID was specified, and I can activate that. And afterwards I can see, if I refresh now the UI, that these UI annotations are taken over and that with the travel ID, agency ID and customer ID are available without using the settings dialog. So now, of course, just seeing the data without search capabilities or filter capabilities is quite boring. So besides this list report, we also need some smart filter bar, or in classic SAP GUI terminology, the selection screen. And therefore, what I need to do is we add, besides this line item annotation here, also the selection field annotation. So for example here, travel ID has position 10 as a selection field, agency ID position 20. Activating this again, pressing the go button does not change anything. We need to refresh the metadata and refresh the application, the app, by reloading the URL. And then we can see that we have all the filter available here and that they already work. So we can see even that we have, for example here, a value help available where we can filter on the value help values, or we can just display all the values and take them over. So why is this the case? This is the case because we already added here, for example for the agency ID, we added the value help definition, which tells us that we use for this entity value help a different entity, which is the agency, that the element agency ID of this CDS view iAgency contains the values which I can choose within a value help for the field agency ID of my travel. So agency ID is a foreign key to a different view, and within the view a certain field, which is a key, so it provides the values for the agency ID. And based on this annotation, we select then the data in the Fiori Elements app. And that is also the reason why this CDS view was exposed in the service definition, which I have shown at the beginning. So now we have a list report with a selection screen, but the search capabilities are very limited. So how can I extend now the search capabilities of this CDS view? We go back to the travel demo example, and we add here now search capabilities by defining the CDS views to be searchable and to define a search element. We activate this again. We go to the UI, refresh this one, and we can see that here now the search is enabled and all vacations are found. So now I think we have already a pretty nice list report with a selection screen and with a error-tolerant text search. But what about functionality? What about the behavior, the application coding? Here it gets now more interesting. So we can now say that we have the CDS views for our business object available, the first part of the business object, the root and the compositions. The second part is now to create behavior. And the behavior is created by defining a new behavior definition for this CDS root artifact, which are already prepared. So it's simply a click and then the artifact is created with some defaults like this, and we have to decide what is the implementation variant, the type of the implementation. As I say, one of the reasons why we are introducing REP is the support of existing application coding. If you know BOPF, then you know that you can implement in a nice way determinations and validations, but that you're not able to implement the create, update, delete, and the save completely by yourself. BOPF is an implementation framework for your application coding by structuring your code in determinations, validations, and actions. But in case your application coding is available, for example, because you're already using it in a SAP GUI transaction, or maybe also in addition in a WebDynPro application, then you are asking, how can I integrate that now here into REP? And the answer is that we offer an implementation type unmanaged. An implementation type unmanaged means you are on your own responsible for the implementation of create, update, and delete and everything which is specified. In case the implementation variant would be managed, then we take over the implementation of create, update, and delete, similar to BOPF. We natively integrate here also the concept of determinations and validations into this business object and into the ABAP language. So the behavior definition artifact, which we see here, was newly introduced with REP. And the syntax is also completely new. We define here now the behavior for our travel business object node, the root node, provide an alias which is called travel. So within the CDS behavior definition syntax, we can now add, for example, an action. So I want to see on the list report an action, a button, which allows me to set the status to booked for the selected travels which I can see in the UI. We can specify for the action input parameters, so this action does not have input parameters, and we can define also the result cardinality and also the result type. And here, in case of this application, the result type is self. We activate this BDEF artifact, behavior definition, and we can see here again that we have a nice development flow and can implement this then via right-click in the context menu via new behavior implementation by an ABAP class. This class already exists. We can go into the implementation of this class. So before we go into detail what is available here, we first add some coding. We can see that this class has a handler and a saver. So the handler is the implementation of the interaction phase. The interaction phase of a business object is runs when a user presses the edit button until he presses the save button. So these are all the updates, the creation of data, pressing some actions, and all the things which are then stored in the transactional buffer of the business object. And by pressing save, the save sequence is executed, and the implementation of the save sequence is the saver here in this example. So we have two classes, two local classes, one taking over the modify of the interaction phase and also, as we can see later on, other operations, and we have the saver taking over the check before save, the finalize, where we can do the latest changes, and the save. Here we have a clear orchestration which starts with the finalize, then the check before save, and then, if available, then the adjust numbers in case of late numbering, where we need to get gap-free numbers for legal reasons, and finally the update task call via the save method. So here we can see that the save is completely implemented by myself by calling our available function modules from the SAP GUI world. But we can also see in the modify declaration that we can define the names of the parameters representing the keys for which the action travel set status booked should be called, and the result of this action, which is of course mass enabled, we have only mass enabled actions, the result is written into this internal table. So here we can see that we have a lot of new syntax elements which we introduced, because what we're doing here is we are introducing the concept of a business object. We are introducing that into the ABAP language in a native way, because we can here then highly benefit from all the advantages like code completion, typed APIs with static ABAP code checks, element info, and all the things. So if I press, for example, F2 on the modify, we can see that we do not have any generic API with data references and with constants representing something which should be executed, but that we have here a very BO-specific API representing the types which I require. So we take over the types from the CDS view where I attached it, because you choose $self as the result type of the action, and therefore I get IT travel set status booked for the action, including the exporting parameter. So, and in the implementation of the modify method, we could put in all our application logic here now, but since we want to make clear what is now the programming model and what is our example, we have a wrapper of the available function modules, which is an ABAP wrapper of the function module. So we can see that we provide the data, importing data and exporting data to this, and also some feedback channels, which we come later to. So if I navigate now into this implementation, we can see that more or less immediately the function module is called, so the flight travel set booking function module from my existing application coding, and that we need some pre and post processing. Of course, we need some kind of adapter. So we have different input and output naming conventions, because the classic world are strange German abbreviations maybe, and our CDS world are well-defined names following naming conventions, uppercase or case sensitive, and yeah. And of course the output channel is also maybe a different one, because we define three channels, which is mapped for the creation of data, when you define the key already in the modify, which is reported to provide end user messages, T100 messages, and which is failed, which tells you which instances could not be processed during the execution, for example, of an action. So having said that, we now have the implementation of the action. We activate this integration of the action implementation into REP. And now we need to go again to the metadata extension. And in the metadata extension, we of course need to enable also the action which is available here. So in this action, we can define the label set status to booked. This label can of course also be translated like any other description of a data element and is persistent in the backend. And yes, so after we provided the action modeling in the behavior definition, the implementation in ABAP referring to this behavior definition, we enable it in the metadata extension, because maybe not all actions should be exposed to the UI. Also, this one should be covered in the future by the editor provided by the subweb ID. And now in the preview of our user interface, we can now press F5 and see that our action is hopefully available. After refreshing, we can see that we have this set status to booked label available here. And when I select, for example, this instance here with the status new, and I press now set status to booked, click, we can see that the result booked is already available here now. So the next things which we want to show are, for example, create, update, and delete. So we again go to our behavior definition of the business object. So the travel business object behavior definition. And we enable now the create and the update and delete of our business object. Activate it. Go into our ABAP implementation, to our handler, and add here also create, update, and delete, which are then importing parameters for the operations for our business object node alias travel. And in the implementation of modify, it's pretty much the same. We forward the code to our function module for creating the data, like demo, flight, travel, create. We go back to our ABAP implementation and activate the ABAP implementation for this behavior definition as well. Then we can see on the UI, if we refresh this one, that we are also able to create, delete data. So let's try this out. I press the create button and I select an agency ID. If I'm not wrong, this is a valid one. We select a customer ID and we select a starting date, which might be now the 21st of December, and the end date might be now, for example, the 1st of or the 2nd of January. The booking fee is like 500 euro. The total price is like 1000 euro, and the description is like Christmas holiday trip to family. The traveling status is set to new. And I can save the data. And if I press go now, we can see that the Christmas holiday trip to my family has the traveling status new, all the details which I've inserted here, and I'm of course also able to edit this one. And of course the same data could be now in parallel be edited via our existing SAP GUI transaction. So we open our SAP GUI transaction and maybe edit now the 4157, the travel ID of my Christmas trip. I can display the data, of course. And now the question comes up, what happens if two users with different apps or even with the same app are working in parallel on the same data? So for example, if I'm now editing here this data and someone else is changing the data, going into edit mode here, then the Christmas holiday trip to friends, family and friends can be saved by this one, even though this one here decides to have a Christmas holiday trip to friends only. I can save this one and I can save this one. And who wins now? The last one. And this is because we do not have a common usage of enqueue logs, of exclusive logs. The SAP GUI transaction already uses the logs, but the Fiori application doesn't even know about them and therefore ignores the logs. And how can we now enrich the Fiori Elements application by using also our enqueue log? We can implement it after we edit it to the behavior definition of our business object, like adding a log master. A log master defines the granularity of the logging of my business object. So currently we can only edit on the root node level. And then any change of the business object, any change, any modify, any update, any create on a subnode will result in a log of the root on the root level. Later on we might also, or we probably will also offer log masters on detailed levels if we need log shadows on a more fine granular cardinality. So for example, if you have very big instances like a plane, the airplane planning, then you obviously need several people to plan one airplane, and then of course they need to work in parallel on even one business object instance. And currently we don't support this, but this is on our roadmap. So I added the log master, and of course in my modify handler I also need to add the implementation for the log, which is just calling my enqueue log object for the travel business object. I activate this one again, and now if we have both in parallel, that means our SAP GUI transaction and also our Fiori application, we can see that when I go here into edit mode and I just say Christmas holiday trip, and we change it as well here, we go to the Christmas holiday trip to friends and I edit it. And we say Christmas holiday trip to Germany. We want to save this data. Then we get the error message, unable to log travel. We do get the error message by pressing the save button, because this is a non-draft application. So all the changes are kept on the UI until the end user presses the save button, and by pressing the save button all the data is transferred to the backend via $batch, and then the backend processes the data and recognizes that there is already an enqueue log by executing the log method of the business object travel. If we want to have this error message already available during the edit button, when I press the edit button, which I would expect from an enterprise application, then we are more working with the draft application, which is currently not yet supported with rep, but we are currently working on that. So, but now, despite the draft support, we have already the enqueue log support. But what we do not have is, so your entries will be lost if you leave this page, so I leave the page. So there is no draft persisted. But what we do not have is an ETEC support, which means a user can override the changes of a different user without being notified about that. So if, for example, the user A here changes the description to Christmas holiday trip and saves the data, and in the meanwhile someone else is in a read-only mode of this application, of this data, and also presses the edit, and he says Christmas holiday trip to friends in UK and Germany, and save the data, then the data of the user A is overwritten by user B, and user B was not informed about that, and user A was also not informed about that. Therefore, what we need here is the ETEC support. That means support for the optimistic locking. We add this optimistic locking via the so-called ETEC field, which is in most cases a timestamp. And we take this timestamp in order to compare the timestamp before the changes were done and after the changes, or when the changes should be done. And if the timestamp differs, then we know that in between someone else changed the data and we decline the change. So now we activate this, and in the implementation we also need to support an additional method, which is the read method. The read method is always part of the contract of a business object, but now having the ETEC available, where we need to compare and therefore to read the data, it's the latest point in time where we need to support the read method. So now coming to the application, we refresh the application again, because changing the ETEC is not only a back-end enrichment, but is also a change of the contract. Therefore, we need to refresh the UI. So, and now we do pretty much the same. We open the data in both scenarios. So we go into the read-only view of this one, of the 4157. We go also here into read-only mode. We change the data here. Christmas holiday trip to friends in UK and US. And we change the data, we save it. Now we go into edit mode here. Of course, we do not get feedback right now because we do not have a draft application. So we just say Christmas holiday again. And if I save now the data, we get an error message which declines the update. So of course this error message, which is displayed here, precondition failed, is not an end-user friendly error message, and obviously here work is in progress. So I would expect an error message like, data was changed in the meantime by someone else, you're not able to save the data. And with having this available now, we have a very nice support of enqueue locks. That means exclusive locks that not people can work on it in parallel, and that we can also ensure that people are not overwriting data without being notified that someone else has been worked on that in the meantime. So now what we have is an integration of our application coding, of our database tables and the log object into REP. What we can also integrate is now the PFCT object. So for example, for the read-only scenario, for the query, we can enrich our CDS view with the DCL artifact, defining the query, that means the read authorizations for the CDS view for the current end user. And here we can use via this aspect the PFCT object, which we can also use, or which we currently already use in our function modules, because the function modules probably also are using the authority check with the PFCT object. And here for this query we can enrich that in addition. But since I do not want to go now into all the security and authorization relevant transactions, I take this out and I add a static restriction, which does not make sense, because if I have such a use case, I would directly put it into the where clause of the CDS view. And in case of authorizations, we need to distinguish it for the user, so we need a PFCG object. But just in order to show you how it works with the DCL, we can now define that the select of the travel demo should always consider an enrichment of the where clause where the status is B. Of course, in general, we would use the PFCG object with the activity if it was created according to the guidelines with 03 for the display scenario. If I activate this one now, we go to our application. We don't need to refresh it because it's just a back-end behavior change. We can select the data and see that from 4,000 we just have 1,000 instances available, data records, and all are set to booked because we restricted here to status where the status is booked. So, and now, since we integrated this business object logic into RAP, we can now also use some kind of API, a general available business object API, can be used wherever we want. So, for example, we can use it in a report. We can create a sub-GUI report or even transaction, or integrate it into an existing application. And we can integrate here now a newly created business object API and access API for our travel business object. We can, for example, say that we want to modify the entity travel by creating data provided in this internal table. And we can see that the type is already inherited from this CDS view. We don't need to define any data definition here, type declaration, because this data type is already derived from the CDS view. And then we can also get the feedback, the mapped, reported, and failed, which I introduced or which I mentioned during the implementation from provider side of the business object. So we left the provider implementation of the business object. Now we are consuming the business object. Here I can define a breakpoint, and if I press now F5 or F8, yes, F8, we can now define or create new data. New data via EML, the entity manipulation language. And now we can see in the debugger, if we jump over the statement, that if whether or not the data was created successfully, and if failed is initial, and failed is initial, because the travel node does not have any failed instance, then we would expect that the data is also shown in, of course, the Fiori application. So going back now to the Fiori application, we search for EML and press Go. And here we can see that the instance 4158, not EML, but 4158 was created was maybe not created. And why not? So we do it again. We execute the report. Because it's a different business object, so it's not the demo business object. Therefore, it was created in a different database tables, and therefore the UI doesn't show it. Because our UI from the preview from the solution, which I have initially shown, shows the data. So therefore, we try it here, 4158, and go for it. We search for travel ID 4158 and go for it. And of course it was the travel ID. So And here we can see now the created instance, finally, new data via EML. So, and what else can we do with that? Of course, if we have now a business object, we are also highly interested in testing the business object. Because testing a business object is very important to us, since we want to see if the internal business object, internal business logic of the business object is applied correctly from a consumer point of view. Therefore, what we can do is we can create test classes using now this in EML, this new extension of the ABAP language, in order to test business object. So therefore, we open now the test class which we created. And here in this test class, we can see that we have a test method, CUD travel, which tests the create, update, and delete, which is for testing. And then we can see that maybe 3 instances are being created, 2 of them are valid, and 1 is invalid because the agency ID is unknown. And then within the test, we can see that the failed has 1 entry, and the mapped for the other 2s, which were created successfully, is filled with the 2 keys which were created here. So this EML, entity manipulation language, is integrated into ABAP in a similar way to ABAP SQL, or formerly known also as OpenSQL, that we have here into the ABAP platform, into the ABAP language, an integration of this BO API in a completely typed way. That means we have here auto-completion that works. So for example, for the CDS views, we can see that the data type here is derived from the chosen data type up here, and that also mapped, reported, and failed contains the alias which was defined in BDEF. So I don't have to work with data references. I will get issues already at compile time because we can apply static compile checks and the element info, and so on and so forth. And of course, this EML can now be used nearly everywhere. I can use it in unit tests. I can integrate that into existing or new sub-GUI transactions or other UI technologies. And I could also, for example, if I'm now in the environment of a banking solution where I need to implement a predefined REST API, which is maybe cannot be defined via OData, I can implement a CL-HTTP handler by also accessing a defined or to be defined business object. I don't have to implement everything in a freestyle way if I don't want to. I can use a business object and forward the calls coming from the REST service to the business object by using create, update, and delete, or the actions, which is a really big benefit. So having said that, we come to the end of the demo. We can maybe go ahead with a summary of development flow, because we created a business object. By using the CDS data model, we added the CDS behavior definition artifact. We implemented the behavior in ABAP, where we integrated the log object. And in CDS, we were able to integrate the DCL artifact by using the authorization object. And we can define here a scenario and integration test. And on top of this business object, we can define the scope, which should be exposed to OData by using the service definition artifact. In addition, we can use a service binding artifact defining the scenario, for example here Fiori UI, and the protocol which is used, for example OData v2. And since we know this protocol here in the tooling LAN, we can provide a Fiori elements preview, because I am, as the ABAP backend developer, want to have a preview tool within my backend tooling, within ABAP in Eclipse, the ABAP development toolkit. And I don't want to be forced as a backend developer to use the sub web IDE. Of course, the sub web IDE is our strategic tool for the UI developer, but I'm, as a backend developer, I'm using the ABAP in Eclipse environment. And therefore, a preview of my OData service is very valuable here. And with this, we are at the end of the session. I want to say thank you to all of you. Please don't forget the session survey. And I'm looking forward to see you again in one of the next sessions. Thank you very much.